Misty, how you doing? It's been a long time.
Doing well, John. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good. Good to see you too. Everything going well with the business?
We're doing okay. We're holding our own amidst the whole COVID thing. As you know, we do a lot of farm fuel. We do a lot of mass transit fuel. We do a lot of heating oil and
Right.
energy type fuels. So we've fared very well, even though we're kind of a young company. Without doing a lot of gas stations, we didn't quite take the hit that some larger, bigger companies did. So we're doing well.
It's nice to have the resiliency when things kind of go crazy elsewhere for your operation to keep plugging along, isn't it?
It is. And like they tell you, you should always diversify your portfolio. So if you're in the fuels industry, there's a lot of places you can go. We even just added propane to that. So we're trying to cover all the bases for the customers that we can.
So within your scope of work, what are the biggest issues you've been seeing in the market in the last year or so that have you kind of focused on, what do we got to do about it? What things in the market do you see need to be addressed?
There's been a big change in the regulations on heating oils and power generation fuels, dyed diesel. And we're located in Maryland. Of course, that's a fairly small state. A lot of the fuel that we sell crosses state lines, and we've got different regulations from one state to the next. And that's been a big challenge, trying to balance that a little bit between customers for them to understand that these fuels are interchangeable, or maybe they're not. That's been a huge issue for us.
Regulatory consistency seems to pop up in every sector of this market that I've been working in. It's when you're a multi-state operator and the states just are not coordinated in terms of what they're requiring, regardless of what the product is, it really is a major challenge.
I would definitely agree. You see it a lot in gasoline as well. And of course, as you know, with the COVID and the issues in the pipeline, the products that are sold in certain states, they had to waive all the emissions regulations and things like that because we just couldn't turn the product over into summer gas fast enough. Right. And, if Virginia changes the law, that's great, but a lot of the Virginia fuel actually moves into Maryland. And then if Maryland hasn't changed the law, then it just really puts the logistics off balance and can create a lot of issues down the line.
When I first started with NACS, before the Fuels Institute ever existed, it was back in 2000. And the number one issue we took on at that point, there was two of them. One, underground storage tanks reform, but also boutique fuels. All these niche markets and the requirements for different fuel blends. And when you had a disruption in the distribution system, these places just got abandoned and prices spike up in certain markets. And that lack of fungibility within the supply was a major problem back about 15, 20 years ago.
Absolutely true. And from a consumer standpoint, the fuels are the same.
Right.
You can take your car from Maryland to Virginia and you don't know the difference between a 9-pound RVP and a 7-pound RVP. All you know is your car is running, I mean, you get some issues with like the E15s, the higher grades of that, but people don't know the difference. They have no idea what's going on in the backside, and it's ultimately costing them a lot of money.
Yeah. We did a lot of research on consumer behavior, and they decide what to buy based upon price. Yes. And they're not thinking about all those other things. I remember I had somebody come in, I was working on Capitol Hill, and I had somebody come up and say, well, these gas stations, they're really smart. I mean, they're putting their stores right where all the gasoline is in the ground. It's like, really? Do you really think that? Do you think electricity comes out of the wall as well? But there are people out there who think that. It's really amazing how the effort that goes into taking a barrel of oil, converting it into a liquid fuel that can power your vehicle and getting it to a point of purchase where you can actually acquire it at $2 a gallon is absolutely astounding.
It is. Absolutely. I agree. And I think, being the Fuels Institute and talking a lot by fuel quality, the other thing that consumers don't understand is a lot of times issues with fuel quality are at the station level. It's not that Exxon makes bad gas or that BP makes bad gas. It's that one station where you got fuel maybe hasn't had their tank cleaned in the last 10 years. So, but they just associate the brand, as being part of the quality. But it is a fungible commodity ultimately.
Yeah, what I try to remind people is that gasoline produced from 5-6 different refineries may be dumped into the same 1-million-gallon storage tank at a terminal, put into a pipeline, separated into different tanks at another terminal, blended with other fuels from other refineries. You have no idea which refinery made the product that's going in your vehicle, but it's the proprietary additives and packages that are added to it that makes it a different fuel. But it's amazing. People really do think that well, I bought it from here. It must have come from that refinery. That's logical in the consumer's mind because they don't understand that mixing and matching in the system that makes it so efficient really is completely beyond their comprehension.
It's true. And in my experience, you can't explain it to most of them. So I just smile and nod.
I tried to explain to my parents once. They were saying, John, I don't understand. The fuel from a Chevron at every Chevron should be the same price. And I don't understand why it goes up and why different stores are different prices. And I walk them through this because that's my job. I walk them through 15, 20, 30 minutes, show them slides and pictures. My mom's response was, well, you may be right, but I still think they're taking advantage of me. It's like, come on, Mom. Break through the age-old rhetoric that you have in your head and think about what's really happening out there, because it is a complex situation. The fact that we can get product for so inexpensive, they should really just be applauding the industry for doing so.
Right. I love to tell people who are a little bit in the know the story of, I guess, the year that diesel hit $4 a gallon. I said, who do you think moved the most fuel in Colonial Pipeline that year? And of course, Colonial Pipeline being the line that serves the whole East Coast up from Texas and New Jersey. And people will be like, oh, Exxon, BP, Morgan Stanley.
Yep.
Because it is a publicly traded commodity. And these guys buy and sell and hedge these barrels against other things that they have. I mean, it's the big sellers in fuel and the big money makers aren't always who you think they are.
Right. You raised you made a comment a couple of minutes ago about the health and environmental cleanliness of underground storage tanks. And so the Fuels Institute has a diesel fuel quality council, and you were at a workshop we did last year. We're talking about how do we improve the quality of fuel that's going into the vehicles. And we're looking at promoting best practices for tank management, housekeeping practices, for distributor operations to make sure there's no cross-contamination and make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to preserve the integrity of the fuel. What are the things you're seeing in the market that can be helpful to help make sure that the product that's going into the ultimate vehicle is as clean as it can be?
So one thing I see with a lot of my end users, and so these are big construction companies, maybe universities, is they're very focused on keeping the tanks full, but they maybe don't turn over the fuel fast enough. So when you get to a really big, like a Costco, that's turning over truckloads of fuel, 3 or 4 a day, the fuel doesn't have time to sit and settle and for things to come out of it. So for a lot of my customers, I tell them, you've just got to turn that fuel over. You've got to burn it. You've got to use it. That helps a lot. And that's a small thing they can do. There's a lot of good additives out on the market now too, that will help to keep any particulate matter still suspended. It doesn't mean it's going to get through those high micron filters that are on new vehicles, but that's also very helpful. But just the little things, keeping your tank lids tight and, occasionally changing the filters on your vehicles, all those things go a long way.
It's amazing as we're writing these best practices, the resounding echo we've heard in the process of peer review and the education sessions we've done at different conferences is water is key. You got to keep the water out of your tanks. Do everything you possibly can to keep those seals tight, to keep the vents closed when they need to be closed. Make sure that you're inspecting the physical condition of your externally facing interfaces, so you make sure that if there's any place water can get in, you cut that out at the source as fast as you can, because without water, you're not going to get corrosion. Without water, you're not going to get degradation of quality. Get the water out of there, and then everything becomes a lot easier than it could be possibly otherwise.
Absolutely. And the diesel fuel now, of course, is the lowest sulfur it's ever been. And sulfur is an antimicrobial. It keeps the algae out. But the lack of sulfur also makes the fuel more friendly to water. So when you've got an above ground tank and the temperature is changing, it's going to sweat a little bit. These new low sulfur fuels like that water a lot, and they will combine with it and pull it out much more than the old fuels would. And so you're right, keeping those tanks clean is a big deal. But when you've got an above ground tank, the expansion and contraction that happens in fuels and the sweating that happens inside, you've just, like I said, sometimes the biggest answer to that is turning that fuel over. And I do recommend for some of my commercial customers, like I do backup heat systems for hospitals and stuff, they'll have diesel fuel sitting in tanks for years. and they can't burn it. The EPA has regulations. They have to use natural gas as their heat source unless it's an emergency and they get it cut off. So that fuel will sit there for years. At some point, you just have to have someone come out and filter it for you. Yeah. It's just going to go bad.
Yeah, the shelf life isn't forever. And that's,
No.
I think your comment about turning your tanks quickly, we're doing a sampling and testing project right now where we've collected nozzle samples from diesel outlets from 190 sites. We've taken tank samples from, I think, 140 sites. We're testing them for different properties. The tank samples we're testing for microbial growth. We're testing for biofuel content. We're testing for water content, sediment, all those things that help us understand what is going on in the market. But once we have that information, now it's about getting out there and convincing the market to take the corrective actions necessary to prevent these problems. You guys do a lot of training of your customers and your clients. What are the things that you're teaching them throughout your service area that they need to be focused on primarily?
Ooh, it really, that's a tough answer, right? It really depends on the customer class and what they do. When they're dealing in the diesels and stuff, again, it's turning that tank over, it's keeping everything tight. And then periodically, you're just going to have to clean it. You're going to have to bring someone out to clean the actual fuel. Tank cleaning should be done anyway. But for people who do a lot of gas and ethanol blends, that's highly corrosive. That's a lot higher rate of cleaning and testing and checking. But the main thing I definitely tell everyone is keep that tank tight, have it tested, have it checked. If you're ever in doubt, call us. We'll sample it and send it off to have it tested for you and tell you what's going on in there. I do believe there is a lot more biofuel in our diesel now than we realize. I think it gets kind of added in here and there. There's a big financial push for renewable fuels, so I think that's adding to the problem a lot. So for my customers and educating them, it's changing those filters, checking the tanks, keeping it tight, and doing all of your tests, and then, of course, having it cleaned every so often.
I think you're coming up biofuels, it's legit. We've seen an increase in biofuel content, both in gasoline and diesel fuel. It's very well cared for. I know the quality of biodiesel has improved dramatically over the last 10 years because there was a time years ago, I had a session when my first years at NACS, I had somebody speaking at the NACS show talking about biodiesel. And he said, here's what you got to do. Got to get a tank, put it in your backyard, and you can produce biodiesel. And then just put it in your fuel. I'm like, oh man, that's not the message we want to be sending. So we've made huge strides in terms of improving the quality of the components we're putting into the hydrocarbon fuel. But I think as we go forward, this push for decarbonizing the transportation sector, for reducing emissions, there's a lot of talk about electric vehicles, and they're coming. They're going to have a significant market share. Yeah. But these internal combustion engines will be burning liquid fuel for the next 50, 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. And we need to figure out a way to kind of diversify that fuel product to reduce its carbon load, to reduce its carbon intensity, to address the government targets that are going to be set over the next 10 to 15 years. Because if we don't, then the acceleration towards alternatives and the villainization, if that's a word, I don't know if it is, of liquid fuels is going to continue. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to really rethink how we approach the liquid fuels market to deliver to the vehicles quality fuel that delivers optimum performance at a reasonable price, but also reduces the environmental impact of those fuels. And I think if we keep focused on that, then we got an opportunity here to really do something great for the market.
Right. And I agree. I'm an environmentalist at heart, believe it or not. I studied biology as an undergrad. And I think that the biofuels, there's something to be said for that. A little bit of the issue there, of course, is that they don't necessarily play nice with the fuels we already have. And so petroleum products have had well over 100 years to get the infrastructure right, to get the logistics right. It's a well-oiled machine, to use a pun, I suppose. And we're going to throw the biofuels in there, and that's great. I grew up near Virginia Tech, down in Virginia, and there was an engineer there who had an old Volvo, and he would go around to the restaurants and get the grease from all the
Mhm.
restaurants, and he would make his own biodiesel, and he had all these stickers all over his Volvo, and it worked great in that small range. When you start getting out and trying to push it out to the mass market, well, then we've got to make some adjustments in how we handle things. And again, we've got to clean those tanks. I think that's a big piece of it too.
And I think, the fact of the matter is, right, we're going to build the infrastructure to charge electric vehicles. That's starting now. We're going to be bringing electric vehicles to market. We have the infrastructure in place to fuel the legacy vehicles and the internal combustion engines and all those vehicles. That's there. I think it's important that we continue to focus on research that allows us to leverage that infrastructure. Instead of having to rebuild everything and replace, how do we evolve so that we continue to service the customers most efficiently? The comments we had earlier that, you can pick up a gallon of gas for $2, $2.50, $3, depending on what state you're in. The complexity of getting that to market is huge. Why not leverage that? And I was looking at the ARPA-E, which is one of the research programs that Department of Energy helps fund. The amount of studies and research projects that they are helping to coordinate to improve the quality and the environmental performance of liquid fuels is incredible. And I'm really excited. I think there's a huge opportunity here as long as we keep our minds open to the options and not get locked into one designated answer. There are multiple answers. I think that if we continue to explore all these opportunities, we're going to come up with something pretty darn cool.
Right. I agree with you. And I do think one thing we're doing wrong is not looking at the logistics of it as well as we should. And I always give this example to people that I flew into Phoenix a few years ago, and you're coming into the airport, and Phoenix is on the surface of the sun if you've never been.
Yeah.
There are no solar panels on the houses.
That's insane.
But I flew out of Portland, and they're everywhere.
Yeah.
So if we apply things where they make the most sense, then they have a lot more power that way. And when it comes to being more efficient, one of the biggest hits the oil business has taken in the last decade was the CAFE standards. Mm-hmm. Even more than $4 a gallon and things like that, reduced demand, that CAFE standard. We can make a good car, an internal combustion engine car that has sufficient power. It doesn't have to get 12 miles to the gallon. It can get 40. We have that technology. And that's a piece of the puzzle too, I think.
Yeah, I testified for Congress a couple of years ago, and one of my fellow panelists was saying, look, we have made huge strides in the technology of the internal combustion engine. They can be incredibly efficient, but the American consumer wanted power and performance. So those advances, they kind of split the benefit between greater efficiency, but more power. If you take a look at the pickup trucks 10 years ago to today, they're getting 30 to 40% more miles per gallon than they did 10 years ago, but they're also getting 100 to 150 more horses. Yeah. And because that's what the customer wants. And that's what the regulators sometimes don't get. They think about, we have a issue, we have a target, we have a goal, our objective. But you know what? If the customer doesn't want to buy the product that gets us there, what's the point? Mm-hmm. We have to satisfy the consumer. And the auto industry, I think in the United States, has done a really good job of delivering the vehicles that customers want while continuing to improve the efficiency of them. They're under pretty good pressure recently to accelerate that, and they will. So we're going to see a decline in fuel consumption per mile. But I think we're also going to be giving the customers some fantastic vehicles and machines to be driving around.
I think we are too. And I went to a conference recently, and Denton from Opus spoke, and they talked about premium gas. One of the ways they're getting that MPG is by putting turbos into these cars. Yep. And the turbo requires the higher octane fuels. And so you're seeing a lot more of that as part of it. And, to get there, to get to their goals, we can absolutely do that, but it's just like climbing a mountain. A helicopter doesn't drop you at the top. You got to start, and it's the incremental steps. It's weaning the consumer down. It's creating some demand for these powerful vehicles that actually get reasonable fuel economy, and we just move that way. I do think we're going to see more electric cars, and I think that's wonderful, but where they're most popular over the U.S. tends to be places like California, where they already have too much pressure on the grid anyway. Mm. And here in Maryland and the DC area, I see a whole lot of Teslas parked in front of 8,000 square foot houses that have 2 residents. I I mean,
it's not an environmental play. Let's be honest about that purchase.
Yeah,
It's not for the environment.
They're just buying it because it's sexy at that point. I don't believe, they want to be cool, baby, the cool points, because Teslas are good looking cars, let's be honest.
They are. Well, I got to tell you, I am an internal combustion guy. I like the sound of an engine. I don't envision myself ever buying an electric vehicle. But there are some cool EVs coming on the market real soon that are catching my eye. And I feel like I'm cheating on myself a little bit because I'm going, oh, that is a sexy car. That'd be fun. But wait a second, it doesn't burn gasoline. What am I going to do with that? But there are some really cool options coming on that are going to really influence how customers approach their car buying experience.
I think so. We've gotten lazy and we really love technology, but at the same time, we have a love affair with oil and it's been there a long time. And I'm not exempt from that. Like I said, I grew up kind of in the backwoods of Virginia. So, it was NASCAR and watching guys go really fast and go left all day long.
Yep,
so,
left.
I'm much prefer the sound of a Chevy Supernova, humming, and big V12 Jaguars. That's my sound. That Tesla that kind of sounds like a bee sneaking up behind me is just not the same, even if it does look nice.
Former chairman of NACS, Dave Carpenter, and I were out in California several years ago, and we actually had a tour of the Tesla facility, and they set up a test drive for us. We were in the old Tesla Roadster, and we were having fun. That thing snapped her head back like a roller coaster. It was a blast. We're sitting in a red light, and we hear this boom, 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 and a Porsche GT3 rolls up next to us. We look at each other, and I say, Dave, we can probably beat him across the line. And he smiled, goes, he's going to look and sound so much better doing it, though.
I know. It's true. It's true. They are fast and they're so cool. But yeah, we haven't got over that sound just yet.
Some of us, yeah. So, hey, Misty, it was great catching up with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully get together soon once everything kind of clears up.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to see you and hear you speak at another event.
Okay, I don't want to wish that on a whole bunch of people, but we'll see. Thanks a lot, Misty. We'll talk to you soon.
John.
Bye.